Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto travels to a new land in search of something? Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Aragon and Murtaugh had been traveling for several days now. They had been through the desert, a jail, several swords, and many fights. Over the time you could say they have grown in companionship. But, the news of Murtaugh's ancestry was troubling indeed. Saphira and Aragon had decided not to waver on their thoughts that Murtaugh was still a true friend, but they were still suspicious in the crevices of their hearts. They were only a day from the Varden, nearing in the approach. Aragon coughed as he climbed the next cliff while leading Snowfire. They had been on the move for quite some time now. They had been riding or climbing for most of the day. When they needed to sleep, they slept on their horses to pass through the mountains, alternating who led and who would sleep. Aragon reached into Snowfire's saddle pouch and pulled out the wine skin. He took a slow drink and then tossed it to Murtaugh, who was leading Cornac. Murtaugh deftly caught it and took a drink as well. Murtaugh passed the wineskin back so that Aragon could put it back. Aragon looked forward as he saw smoke rising above them. Murtaugh, Aragon whispered out as he nodded towards the smoke. Murtaugh nodded, drawing his sword. Aragon did as well and slowly crept on the edge of the cliff to see where the smoke was coming from. Aragon squinted as he looked at the origin of the smoke. A fire was being tended to by a person. He did not see a horse but rather a small pack hanging to the side. No glimmer of weapons visible that was, but still this person seemed to be camping out in the middle of the mountains. Aragon looked at Murtaugh, who looked back. Do you think it is a trap? Murtaugh shook his head. Impossible, the Urgles would just attack us. They aren't crafty enough to set up this kind of ambush. Aragon nodded. Let's scout it out. Aragon and Murtaugh led the horses about 50 paces away from the fire. Far enough so the horses could not be heard but close enough so that they could run the horses if there was any danger. Aragon had contacted Saphira to let her know their encounter. She was waiting on one of the higher cliffs, ready to swoop down to protect them. Aragon moved slowly towards the fire. He saw a man tending the fire with a small pot over it. The man was wearing a hood so he could not see the face. Aragon looked at Murtaugh, who merely shrugged and looked back. The man paused for a bit, looking at the fire. Aragon and Murtaugh tensed. Did he hear them? That was impossible, they were as silent as ghosts on their approach. The man merely nodded to himself and reached into his small pack to get out some more meat. He put the meat in the pot and started to stir with a wooden stick. The man sniffed and nodded to himself, satisfied. There's plenty here, strangers. Aragon and Murtaugh held their breaths. He had sensed them. Aragon tensed as he readied his sword. I mean you no harm. I am just a traveler and explorer. Aragon looked back at Murtaugh once more. Murtaugh once again shrugged and sheathed his sword. Aragon followed suit but he relayed Saphira to be ready just in case. The man turned as watched them approach. Aragon called out, Ho, there, my name is Aragon, this is my companion Murtaugh. What business do you have here? The man seemed to smile underneath his hood. I am simple traveler on my way to explore these mountains. I do not care for the ongoings of these lands if that's what you mean. I simply wish to spend my time exploring. Aragon cast a brief look at Murtaugh, who picked up for him. Then would you remove your hood then? The man's smile grew. Of course, where are my manners? The man removed his hood. Aragon and Murtaugh were treated to a very interesting sight. The man had spiky blonde hair, extremely uncommon in Aglesia. He had 3 whisker marks on each cheeks and his eyes were a deep sea blue that seemed timeless. Aragon nodded. What is your name? The man smiled. My name is Naruto. Then the man moved to pick out 3 bowls and started filling them with soup. He sipped the pot once and nodded, signifying it was ready. He poured the soup into the bowls and laid 2 of them on the ground towards Aragon and Murtaugh. He moved back with his own bowl and sat near the pack. Go on, the man said, smiling as he ate his soup. It has been a while since I've eaten with anyone. Aragon moved forward and brought the bowl to his face. He sniffed it and it smelled very savory. Murtaugh had already taken it and tasted it. It is good, Murtaugh said as he continued to eat, not taking his eyes off the man. Aragon sipped as well. It was good. The meat's fat was melted into the soup, giving it a nice taste, but there were some herbs in it so that the meat's thickness wouldn't overpower the taste buds. Naruto smiled cordially as he kept drinking his soup. What are you doing out here then? The traveler asked as he refilled his bowl. Aragon casted a quick look at Murtaugh, who shook his head. Aragon understood the message and turned back to the man. Thank you for the food, sir, but we cannot tell you. The man shrugged. Of course, everyone has secrets. Now, the man paused as he looked towards where Aragon and Murtaugh had just come from. The man stood up and closed his eyes as if in concentration. Aragon pulled his legs closer together, ready to spring into action. Murtaugh also tensed, just in case the man tried to do something. The man opened his eyes and looked at the two. His eyes now had a hardened tint to them. Are you two being chased by an army? Murtaugh and Aragon immediately dropped the bowls and drew their swords and pointed it at the man. Murtaugh growled out at the man. Who are you? No human could possibly hear that far. If the army was that close by, then Saphira would have easily heard. Aragon had received no warning, so the Urgal army was still leagues away. The traveler scoffed. Then you do not know much about the world, boy. Come, we should leave. These newcomers come in great numbers. The man set to turning, extinguishing the fire by tipping over the soup. As he did so, Aragon felt a brush against his mind. He is right. The army is here. How they caught up so fast, I don't know. But we need to get out of here. Saphira told Aragon. The man grabbed his pack and left the soup pot there. He walked towards Murtaugh and Aragon, who were still raising their swords. Aragon nodded to Murtaugh, letting him know that the Urgal army was, indeed, on its way. Naruto shook his head. How about this? Let us go to wherever you're going with haste. And then we can discuss who I am later. Where it is safe. Naruto looked at the two and watched as the boys started to loosen up and sheath their swords. Naruto nodded in approval. All right, let's go. Please explain to me the situation as we run. Naruto took off with a burst of speed and Murtaugh and Aragon sprinted behind him. As they ran towards the horses, Aragon explained that the Empire was after them for certain reasons they were unable to discuss. Murtaugh scoffed at the certain, but Aragon ignored it. Naruto seemed unfazed that he had just fed two fugitives running from the tyrannical power of the land. Naruto shook his head. You boys got yourselves in a lot of trouble. I assume you are heading towards the Varden. Aragon and Murtaugh looked at the man in shock. What? How did you? Naruto waved his hand. I am a traveler. I know my way around these places. Else, I would not be alive. I have not contacted the Varden directly, but I have come in contact with some of their men. One of them told me the location. I was traveling here to get some info on some personal goals. Quote. Murtaugh and Aragon both looked at each other once more. It seemed they were both relying on each other to unravel this man. Aragon then spoke up as he reached Snowfire. Who did you meet? Naruto smiled to himself as he looked at Aragon. His name was Brahm. A silence came over the group. Murtaugh and Aragon both stared at the man. Naruto noticed this change and then spoke up. Is something wrong? Aragon's face fell. Brahm died, recently. Naruto's eyes widened. What? Murtaugh nodded. He was killed by a wound from the Razak. Naruto cursed under his breath. He had liked Brahm. He was a good man. He liked his stories about the history of Aglesia when he first arrived here. He had hoped to meet the man again, but, damn it. Naruto looked up and then spoke in a controlled tone. We will discuss this later. For now, follow me. Murtaugh questioned Naruto. Do you have a horse? Naruto shook his head. No, but I know a very short route to a passage of Varden. Naruto ran down the cliff that had a easy path for the horses. Aragon and Murtaugh headed the horses forth. Aragon contacted Saphira to follow them from the sky. Naruto then looked back at Aragon as he was running. You feel familiar like Brahm. Aragon looked incredulously at Naruto, though his gut was churning at the man's sense. What do you mean? Naruto looked away. You feel like you have a connection somewhere else. I don't know what it is and it is not my place to find out. Naruto looked forward as he kept running. The passage we are taking is near the river. It is an underground cave that is quite large. Quote. Aragon mentally was elated. That meant Saphira could come through. Naruto then called out, "Be warned, I was told by Brahm that we must say something to get their attention." Aragon nodded. He remembered Arya's instructions. We know. Naruto leapt over a rock and nodded to Aragon. Very well. In all this Murtaugh noticed, this man did not seem tired. This was beyond being a good traveler, this was a ridiculous amount of stamina. Naruto then slowed down at a large river that led into a basin of a waterfall. Naruto moved forward towards the waterfall. Normally, Naruto spoke, the main entrance is at the top but Brahm told me there was a side entrance just in case the main was being attacked. Naruto motioned for Aragon to move forward. Aragon moved forward and called out towards the waterfall, I Vardan Abr du Shiratugular Gadavanta. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Dragon Rider. Naruto had learned the magic aspects from Brahm. They had been neighbors for a year. In the 4 years he had been in this land, magic language was always fascinating, the way that the words itself had power it astounded him. There was a clanking of the waterfall. 10 men came through or 6 men and 4 dwarves. Naruto immediately felt his danger senses go off. He narrowed into the bald man who was staring at them. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he looked at the man. This man was not to be trusted. The bald man looked at Aragon. You say you are a dragon rider. Aragon nodded. The bald man then paused. Prove it. Aragon smiled as he called down Saphira. Saphira came down soaring in all her glory. Naruto watched as he saw a magnificent beast come down. He was captivated at the elegance yet deadly energy that came off it, a perfect mixture of danger and aesthetics. Aragon called out, "This is proof enough, but we have one more." The bald man snapped, "We do not know if you are an ally of the Vardan." Aragon glared at the man, "We have." The bald man called out once more, "Silence, we will decide who." Then a dwarf called out, "Are you blind? That is Arya the egg carrier." Aragon nodded, "She is poisoned, we need to." The bald man seemed irritated, "We cannot." Naruto looked at the elf and then gritted his teeth. "Enough. Let us enter already. We can do what you want in there. There is an army bearing down on us." The group paused and looked at Naruto. Naruto sighed heavily and his face started to turn towards irritation. Urgles from the Empire. The dwarf nodded. "Let us go inside then." The bald man tried to speak up but Saphira already started to move forward. The guards backed clear away from the dragon. Naruto followed suit and Aragon and Murtaugh followed in together. The guards then closed the gates. They had carried the elf away towards the healers and the bald man was now demanding that they be screened. Naruto was at this point ready to stab the bald man and stop his irritating voice from being spoken. The dwarf, Auric, as he proclaimed himself, told that they were fine as they had brought the elf, Arya. Naruto sighed as he watched the bicker go on. The bald man finally called out, "Be ready to be scanned." Naruto sighed once more, "Who will be first then?" Naruto looked at the bald man who motioned towards the rider. The boy nodded as he prepared himself. Naruto watched as the boy's face grimaced in pain. Naruto's eyes widened as he looked back at the bald man. Naruto clenched his fists as he moved forward and punched the bald man. Murtaugh watched as the traveler moved forward swiftly before any of the guards react and punched the Aragon's examiner. Aragon, who was quickly discussing with Saphira, felt the pain stopped. Aragon opened his eyes to see Naruto surrounded by swords and the bald man on the floor glaring at Naruto. Naruto looked down at the man, ignoring the swords. "Do you intend to mock spell casters with your inhumane use?" The bald man stood up and growled out, What do you mean? Do you intend to say that you are a spellcaster? Naruto chuckled. I do not hold the right, but. Naruto glared right back at the man. I know for a fact that you are intentionally hurting the boy. You are trying to make him resist so that you can crush him. There was silence as the soldiers paused and lowered their swords in disbelief. Oric looked at the bald man and yelled, What? You would intentionally harm the rider. The bald man scoffed as he tried to wave it off. The boy would have been fine. Oric glared at the man. This is not over. The king and a jihad shall hear of this. The bald man paled quickly and did not speak. Naruto shook his head and he then turned to Oric. Tell me, are there any other spellcasters here? Oric nodded. Yes. Naruto then nodded. Then, I do not see a problem of us using a different spellcaster. At least to conduct the search. The bald man tried to retort, they are not as powerful. Naruto rolled his eyes, but they will not try to destroy the Varden's only hope, now would they? The bald man shut his mouth. Naruto smirked. I guess I'm right. Oric looked at Naruto with renewed interest. It was not every day someone took the bald man down several pegs. Naruto then continued, Well, may we leave to a room, we are very tired. Of course you can guard us. Naruto said cheekily, just asking to be refused. And that was a difficult challenge because saying no to a dragon and its rider was not something you did every day. Oric nodded, We will provide you what you need, but I ask that you turn over your weapons. Naruto shrugged, I am a traveler, not much of a warrior. Naruto turned towards the others and they reluctantly unhooked their weapons and handed them over. Naruto nodded to himself, good choice. Naruto and the others were now led towards a large room, more like a hall. Naruto had given up his pack but was not worried. The pack only contained food and a couple things to make camp. The things he needed were safely on his person. Naruto sat down on the floor, his back against the wall. He looked amused at Murtaugh and Aragon who were talking quietly in the other side of the room. Naruto could hear them of course but he made no comment. Naruto turned his attention to the dragon. He was surprised to see it was staring at him as well. Naruto smiled as he stood and approached it. The dragon moved its neck so that it could see Naruto properly. Naruto bowed his head in greeting and he could swear he saw amusement in the dragon's eye. Naruto felt a tug on his consciousness, much like that of the deceased member in his gut. Hello, my name is Saphira. Naruto smiled as he heard the voice. It was a girl. My name is Naruto, pleasure to make your acquaintance. The dragon its head slightly, obviously showing curiosity. You are foreign to these lands? Naruto nodded. Please keep it a secret though, I do not tell that detail to many people. The dragon merely blinked and continued, It is your secret to tell. Thank you for showing Aragon and Murtaugh the way to the Varden. Naruto merely smiled as he looked towards the two still talking. It is nothing. I have done more for other people and I have not once regretted it, well I don't regret most of them. Saphira did not say any more. She knew that the subject was probably private as well. Naruto woke up as he felt someone near the door. It was always his habit, no matter how tired he was, he could always sense the sound of clinking metal, of blades. Naruto removed his right hand from his forearm. It had gone there automatically. Naruto stood up and stretched as the door was opened. Oric, the bald man and several others walked in. Naruto paused as he saw the men were holding the hilt of their weapons. They still do not trust us yet. Naruto mentally shrugged, it was just a precaution and Naruto could respect that. The bald man called out, Wake up, our leader wants to meet with you. Aragon and Murtaugh woke up with a start and got up. Oric walked over holding out their weapons. Here are your weapons, but be warned do not draw them. Quote. Aragon nodded and took the weapons, passing Murtaugh's sword over. Naruto sighed and called out, I believe you have searched the contents of my bag. The bald man nodded slowly, it had nothing of consequence. Naruto nodded once more, may I have it back then? The bald man nodded slowly and motioned for one of the guards to give it to Naruto. Naruto grabbed the back and put it over his shoulder. He sent a torrent of chakra down the back and felt a returning signal. Good they hadn't touched any of the food supply, or at least they didn't understand what this pack really was. The group was now led down several, extremely large hallways. Naruto was already taking in the directions and noting the possible escape routes. Though Aragon and Murtaugh were not companions, they had good hearts and Naruto could at least help them if they got into trouble. Naruto felt a chill on his back and he blinked. He wasn't in the hallways anymore. He was in a field. What was he doing in a field? Naruto looked around and then his attention focused on something. Something beautiful. Naruto tried to call out but his voice would not obey him. The beautiful thing disappeared and Naruto blinked once more. He was back in the hallway. Naruto shook his head. He was doing it again. He thought he had gotten over that but it seemed the chains would never let him go until he completed his mission. They had arrived in the Varden leader's office. It was a somewhat plush quarters, reminding him almost of the Hokage's tower. Nostalgia took Naruto over, as he looked at the many books on the walls. Naruto was now quite amused at this scene. Aragon had entered and Murtaugh had been taken away. It seemed Murtaugh was the son of Morzan, a betrayer of the Riders. Naruto had knew about the history of the Riders very well but Murtaugh didn't seem wild nor evil for that matter. Naruto's gut told him so. And Naruto's gut was usually right. Then, Aragon led to an epic in which he described all the factors of his journey. Finding the egg and so on. Naruto heard Braum's death and was troubled by it. These, Razak, he would definitely hunt them but that was for later he must focus on the task at hand. Now then, the leader of the Varden spoke up, who might you be? Quote. Naruto looked at Ihad, my name is Naruto. I knew Braum about 5 years ago. We were neighbors for about a year. Ihad raised an eyebrow, what do you mean? Naruto shook his head, Aka I frakai. Aka wionata nayat hana ono. I am a friend. I will not harm you. Aragon whipped his head towards Aragon as soon as he heard the ancient language. You know how to speak the language. Naruto shrugged, Braum taught me a few phrases here and there. Mostly taught me history though. I had no need for magic, I prefer my own methods. Ihad raised an eyebrow, since you spoke in the ancient language I will believe you mean no harm. But what do you mean your methods? Naruto gave a small smile as he leaned back. I am, or I was an assassin. Ihad clasped his hands forward and leaned his head forward, taking in this information. It is not every day that an assassin comes to help us. Why should I trust you? Naruto shrugged. Give me a chance to prove myself against the coming army. There you will see whether your trust holds. Ajihad nodded slowly. So you help the Varden? Naruto thought about it for a bit. Helping them out is fine. I approve of what they are doing. And who knows, maybe I can use them to find my own goals. Naruto looked up at Ihad and nodded slowly, on one condition. Ihad nodded, name it and we will see. I assume that you will be sending Aragon to the elves. I want to go with him. Ihad's face grew still as stone. I cannot promise. Naruto raised a hand. Do not worry. I will not cause any havoc, but this also deals with a personal matter. I must contact that person and see how he knew about me. Ihad nodded slowly. Fine. Now then, Auric. Ihad called out. Naruto toned out for the rest of the time. In the back of his mind, he was thinking. Thinking of a place where things were not simpler but much more familiar. Naruto chuckled to himself. What was he trying, fool? War is war, all that changes is the enemy. When most people wake up from a nightmare they usually scream. They wake up yelling and sit up straight. Their bodies are covered in sweat and they are plagued with what they had just experienced. That was for most people. Not for the assassin that laid in the upper levels of Trondheim. No, the blonde assassin woke up with a startling, slow open of the eyes. He did not breathe fast nor did he shake. He simply stared at the ceiling, not even blinking. After a few seconds, a soft breath escaped the nin. The man sat up slowly and blinked a couple times. I had that dream again. Naruto squinted as he remembered flashes of it. It was the same nightmare, or some variation of it. The man sitting in a chair being stabbed with kunais, a battle filled with blood and littered with dead bodies, and the grave of Naruto now took a shuddering breath as he shook his head. He had no need for these thoughts right now. Naruto stood up and stretched his body. He scissored his arms back and forth to get some feeling into them. He had placed a small futon on top of the raised bed in the room. It wasn't necessary, but it did add an extra layer of warmth as he doubled up the sheets. The room was barren but clean, as Naruto has assigned some cage bunshins to work on that. In fact, he had made quite a lot of cage bunshin. He had sent the around the layout of the mountain. Each of them would dispel when they reached a certain point. Naruto would wince at the pain every now and so, but it wasn't something he hadn't handled before. One of the more frustrating parts about this method was that he had to make an extra cage bunshin to cover the caves underground, which were quite expansive. Though the caves were quite impressive, there were too many of them. Naruto had spent over 20 cage bunshins covering the area under Trondheim. At this rate, it would take him weeks before he could understand even a mile out. Though Naruto had to admit that having a confusing and expansive layout was probably the point for the dwarves. Being a nin, one had to respect that. Naruto scratched the back of his head as he reached into his pouch to grab his scrolls. He needed a spare change of clothes. As Naruto walked through the hallways, he couldn't help but notice the emptiness of the stone. And he had to admit to himself, it felt quite relatable. A piece of dry bread was scrunched between his fingers as Naruto continued to walk down. Every so often, Naruto would take a small bite and then keep going. The dry bread was pretty still satisfying though. It reminded him of the dry toast he would have while fighting the Zetsu clones. There were so many of them and they attacked so early, he really didn't even have time for breakfast. So he compromised and ate his toast dry while he killed them. Naruto crunched the bread while he killed the clones. It was difficult multitasking, but he got it done nonetheless. I wonder if there is anywhere I can work out, Naruto thought with some wonder. Aragon walked alongside Oric as they headed towards the training field. Aragon had questioned where he would be tested and Oric simply showed the way. Aragon was restless to say the least. After spending several days in the desert, being hunted by monstrous creatures, Aragon had developed the habit of sleeping with his sword close. Saphira said it was just a protective response, but Aragon was afraid. What was he becoming? Was he a warrior that would one day lead an uprising, or was he a simple farm boy? Aragon shook himself of his thoughts and let his mind drift somewhere else. What of this Naruto? He had talked to him briefly when they were walking over to Ihod. The man seemed very wise and sharp. He also knew Brahm. Aragon wondered if he would be able to learn more about Brahm from him. But where did this man come from? He said he wasn't from Aglesia. That meant he had to come from a different land across the seas. Was he like the elves? But he looked nothing like Arya. But what made Naruto so strange was his eyes. They looked jagged, as if someone took a flawless mirror and smashed it with a hammer. Scarred and old, Naruto's eyes scared Aragon. Or rather, they made Aragon fear him. He had never seen those eyes before. They looked dead. "We are here," Oric announced as his face turned into a bright smile as a large man approached him. The man carried a huge sword that was almost as big as Aragon. "Oric, it's been a while. There is no one left for me to fight with you gone." Oric chuckled. "That's because no one wants to be smacked by that huge sword of yours." Fedric shook his head. "But you can handle it easily enough." Oric waved his hand as his face crinkled in amusement. "That's because I am not as slow as you or an oaf." Fedric's eyebrow twitched and Aragon chuckled inwardly at the banter. Fedric then turned towards him and looked over him. "Dragon Rider and Dragon," Fedric said. Saphira nodded briefly from behind Aragon and Aragon nodded as well. Fedric smiled. "Well, A jihad said we would have to evaluate you, so what weapons do you use? Aragon shrugged. My sword and bow. Fedric nodded. Anything else? Aragon thought for a moment before coming up with an answer. My fists. Fedric roared in laughter as he took in the answer. Good one. Come, let's go into the field. The three entered the field. Aragon cast his eyes around the field, trying to discern the different activities. There was an archer field and several men sparring, though it was divided as their parties of dwarves and humans that didn't mingle. But Aragon's eyes were caught onto something. There was a large group in a circle and Aragon assumed a spar was going on inside the circle. Aragon pointed it out to Fedric, whose face turned thoughtful. The newcomer you brought is fighting in there. Aragon raised an eyebrow. Naruto. But he said he was a traveler. Questioning Fedric, is he doing well? Fedric shook his head as he sighed. More than well, he is unreal. He took on fighting 2 men at once. Aragon's eyes widened. 2 men at once. Did he win? Fedric nodded. Yes, and he has been fighting 2 men at once for over 5 hours, and it seems the pairs have to be switched out instead of him. I don't know how many people he has defeated, but it is quite the score. Aragon nodded. Could we watch? Fedric nodded. Of course, Dragon Rider, it's quite the spectacle. The group of 3 approached the crowd. Many noticed Fedric and then Saphira and parted to make way for them. What Aragon saw as the crowd parted was amazing. Naruto had taken off his shirt as sweat was pouring down. Scars of different sizes littered his body, over several dense muscles. Naruto was wielding 2 short blades in a reverse grip so that the blades were pointed down. A sword was strapped to his hip, but not in the regular way that most warriors carried their weapon. There were 2 hooks on that attached to his belt. The 2 hooks also attached to either side of the sheath. So the blade would be horizontal to the ground, if Naruto stopped moving. But Naruto was moving too fast to be still. The 2 soldiers must have gotten used to fighting with each other because each of them covered for each other's weak side. But Naruto was far too strong to let them overwhelm him. They tried to hack and stab, but Naruto simply parried and pushed the blades away. Naruto would sometimes add a small kick to the arm, which would push the blade away from its intended target. They were moving incredibly fast, and at times Aragon feared that they would kill each other. But Naruto seemed different. He looked like he was playing with them. No, he was teaching them. Naruto would have different stances that showed obvious openings. The pair fighting Naruto would try to exploit it, but Naruto would counter immediately with strange slashes and attacks. The men would try to block it to the best of their ability, but sometimes Naruto's blade went through their guard. And seemingly a coincidence, Naruto would stop short of their skin. At the first few times, Aragon thought that this was just an accident, but it kept repeating and Aragon started to see the weaknesses in the guards of the men. The pair must have noticed this too and readjusted themselves accordingly. It lasted for only 15 minutes after Aragon had arrived. Naruto slipped under both the men's guard and swung with his arms. A huge blow struck both men on the side of their necks, winding them and effectively disabling them. The men fell to the floor coughing. Naruto looked at the 2 and nodded. Very good, I am sure you know what you need to work on. One of the men nodded slowly as he coughed. Thank you for the spar. Naruto chuckled. Anytime. Naruto reached down and helped both the men up. At this point the crowd erupted in cheers. Even Saphira gave a loud bugle of appreciation. Naruto for the first time looked at Aragon. Naruto gave Aragon a brief look over and Aragon felt his breath still. Naruto turned away and looked at Fedric. Ho, there Fedric. Sorry about the attraction. Fedric shook his head. That was some excellent blade work there. Naruto nodded at the compliment. I heard that you were testing Aragon. Could I spar with him then? Aragon felt his stomach clench. His thoughts raged up like a wildfire in dry woods. He wants to fight me. But why? Saphira tried to comfort him. Don't worry, he probably will just teach you. Aragon nodded slowly. Though his muscles were tense, though his feet seemed like lead, Aragon still stepped forward. Fedric raised an eyebrow. One half was wondering how this blonde warrior had heard that far while fighting, and the other was wondering whether to let Aragon or not. Frederick looked over at Aragon, who looked back. I see no reason why not to. Aragon replied. Frederick nodded slowly. All right then, Dragon Rider. There were whispers amongst the soldiers about the new fight arising. Naruto took a deep breath and lifted up his arms in the air. He stretched and then brought them down slowly. As he did so, he called out to the group surrounding them. Could we have more room, please? Naruto called out to everyone. I will need to. Yes, it should work with Aragon. It did with Brahm. The Varden spread out in a larger circle and Aragon stepped in the ring. He grasped his sword and drew it carefully. Zarok felt heavy in his hands and the hilt felt slippery for some reason. Naruto eyed him. A playful look adorned his face, but Aragon saw something different in his eyes. Naruto spoke normally, allowing everyone to hear him. No one stop this fight, please. I will say when it is done. And don't worry, this is not a fight to the death or anything. Just a friendly spar. Everyone nodded in agreement. Naruto let his right leg move back and crouched slightly. His arms spread out, one in front of him and one behind him. Aragon, Naruto said quietly. Aragon perked up. What I am testing is not skill, nor talent. Naruto said carefully. I am testing determination. Aragon blinked. Wah! Naruto didn't let him finish as he charged forward. The blade in Naruto's right arm swung downwards in a deadly arc towards Aragon's neck. Aragon blocked it with all his strength. His arms shook as the blades made contact. He is strong. Aragon thought with fear bubbling in his stomach, like a brewing stew. Aragon tried to push forward, but Naruto's arms seemed to be made out of stone. Aragon felt something jolt his arms, and tingling feeling run through his arms to his head. Naruto swung his other blade and Aragon was forced to push off the other blade to block the left one. As Aragon blocked it, not only did he feel that tingling sensation once more, he felt a push come at his stomach. Aragon tumbled backwards. Landing ungracefully on his butt, Aragon used the momentum and rolled backwards. Aragon saw he had been kicked backwards. Damn it! I didn't even see him move. Aragon got up slowly. The blow hadn't hurt, but it did shake him up. Aragon looked at Naruto and his blood ran cold. The playful face was gone. In its place was a hard and deadly look. The grip on Zarok was ever so tight now. Not wanting to repeat what happened before, Aragon charged in. Aragon swung at Naruto's shoulder. The blonde-haired warrior simply crouched lower, the blade going over him in a clean miss. Naruto, then, proceeded to step forward slightly and punch Aragon in the gut. Aragon flew back, coughing. That blow definitely hurt. Aragon stood up once more and charged again. This time, instead of just dodging and countering, Naruto stood like a mountain. Using his blades and the backs of his fists, Naruto parried Aragon's blade. At times he would move the blades downwards and proceeded to punch Aragon in the face. At other times, Aragon would overextend and Naruto would move to the side and trip him. This lasted for a minute before Aragon was now breathing hard and Naruto was still standing in the same spot. The Varden was now quiet as everyone was watching Aragon and Naruto. Aragon stood up. His muscles were burning with exertion, and his pride equally burning. Aragon glared at Naruto. He was being toyed with worse. What was Naruto's thinking? To embarrass him in front of everyone. Aragon charged forward swinging his sword in a diagonal manner. Naruto blocked and stood still as his arm shook from the force of the blow. Naruto looked into Aragon's furious eyes. Naruto smirked ever so slightly, making Aragon growl. Naruto clicked his tongue. You are becoming angry. Keep your cool. If you strike aim to kill, maiming won't help. Keep your body flowing, do not be stagnant against someone like me. With the last word, Naruto head-butted Aragon. Aragon stumbled back clutching his face. Naruto gave him no time of recovery. Naruto stepped forward quickly and brought up his leg. Kicking forward, the heel of the foot crashed into Aragon's gut. Winded, Aragon tumbled back, His vision was now fuzzy and his stomach now felt numb. Up, Aragon, we are not finished. Aragon blinked quickly to regain his senses and raised his sword. Suddenly, Aragon felt a sudden clarity. It wasn't anything like he had experienced before. He felt every muscle know, every cell in his body. He felt he had complete control over his body. But he didn't have time to understand this feeling fully. Aragon felt wind come from his right and instinctively blocked. The dragon rider was right on the money as Zarok blocked the short sword. Aragon's vision finally cleared to see Naruto still looking into his eyes. Once again out of instinct, Aragon pushed sideways and spun, bringing Zarok around. While turning his whole body, Aragon let loose a vicious swing to Naruto's rib cage. Naruto jumped backwards and smiled at Aragon. Aragon panted at the exertion. Naruto nodded. Better. Naruto put away the daggers and drew the sword behind him. Holding out in front of him, Naruto pointed his sword in challenge, "Come, Aragon." Aragon charged to accept the challenge and the two forces clashed in a ring of glory. As the fight progressed, Aragon did not know how long it had been since they first started. Aragon did not know how many shallow cuts he had gotten, Naruto's little hints of where to block. But he did know that he was in searing pain, his muscles were weak, and he had yet to cut Aragon. There was no one else but Naruto and him. Or, at least anyone he could feel, because everyone else was a blur. Aragon struck downwards at the elusive warrior in front of him. The blonde spun away and then struck downwards with his own sword. Naruto's blade smashed Zarok into the ground. Aragon tried to move back to recover his blade, but Naruto was too quick. Naruto reached out with his left hand and back smashed Aragon across the face. Aragon, unconsciously, stumbled back. Naruto went to push kick Aragon again. But, Aragon, having felt it numerous times, spun like Naruto. The leg went past Aragon, and now Aragon was facing Naruto's back. Aragon struck downwards at Naruto's neck. Naruto weaved to the side and the blade passed centimeters from his skin. Naruto turned his body and elbowed Aragon once again. Aragon rolled backwards as he saw the elbow. The movement backwards absorbed most of the blow, but it still hurt. As Aragon got to his feet, he spat on the side. Blood came out from his ripped gums. He had probably started bleeding from one of those punches he couldn't dodge earlier. The boy right now was running on pure adrenaline and instinct. But what Naruto was doing to Aragon was something, on an even more primal level. Naruto showed him a move by demonstrating it on him. Aragon memorized the feel of the move with his body and copied it to the best of his ability. Not that Naruto had ever explained to him what he was actually doing. Aragon raised his sword again, though his muscles screamed in protest. Aragon charged forward once more. Naruto, simply, sidestepped to the side extremely quickly. Instead of tripping him, Naruto lashed out with his right leg and struck Aragon in the gut. Aragon flipped over and landed on his back. Now, Aragon felt the full weight of all his injuries and groaned as he lay on the ground. Up, Aragon, get up. Aragon blinked as he looked at the sky, Zarok still in his hand. Is this all you got, Aragon? The persistent voice called at him. Get up. You are better than this. Or are you a weak child that needs protecting? Aragon growled, though he had barely the strength to do so. Aragon gritted his teeth as he turned his body over and lay on his stomach looking angrily at the man before him. He would be dead before he gave up this fight. Aragon did not know what drove him to go such lengths, but he felt this undying determination. This unwillingness to call it quits, even as his body started to groan with pain. Though the wounds on his chest, arms, back and face were hammering at him, Aragon forced his grip on Zarok to tighten. Aragon put his palms on the ground and started to push himself up. That was when Naruto struck again. Naruto had crossed the distance and struck Aragon in the face with his boot. Aragon fell on his back again, his ears ringing, and his mouth bleeding. His eyes were watering, but Aragon refused to give in. Aragon turned over and he started to hear voices. Naruto, that is enough, you are toying with him. Have you no shame? Stop, face me, I will teach you a lesson. There were many shouts amongst the crowd, but none of them stepped forward because they had given their word to not stop the fight. Aragon even heard, through the ringing of his ears, Saphira growling. He also felt the tug on his mind as Saphira tried to call on him. Were they trying to protect him? Was he that useless? No. Aragon gritted his teeth as he roared a cry. The crowd and even Saphira went silent. Aragon turned over on his stomach as quickly as he could and stood up. He gripped his blade in his hand and raised it at Naruto, even as he wobbled on his feet. Naruto looked at him once again in the eyes. What Aragon saw there, as he would later reflect on this scene, was not cold, dead, or anything like that, it was approval. Naruto raised his sword as well. Once more, Aragon. Aragon charged forward, a hoarse yell erupting from his throat. Naruto struck back, their blades clashed together. Though Aragon was willing, though he put every ounce of his strength into the strike, Aragon's body could not hold up. Aragon was pushed back and down onto his knees. But Aragon still kept pushing. Somewhere in his body, he felt something open. It was in the back of his mind, something opened. Aragon felt a rush of energy fill his body and his muscles somehow soothed. His body, though already listening, was now renewed in strength. Aragon pushed up with this newfound strength, from where he did not know. Naruto's eyes widened as his sword felt new resistance. Naruto relented, and allowed Aragon to push upwards, forcing him back. The crowd cheered for Aragon. Aragon roared, his body now full of energy, pushed Naruto back. Naruto backpedaled, but at the same time his mind was a race. So it finally worked. It's slow process, but I finally got that one to open. Ever since they had been fighting, with each strike they clashed or Naruto would punch, Naruto would send a torrent of chakra through Aragon. Naruto had traveled the lands and met many people. But he had come to the conclusion, only people who use magic was able to unlock their chakra cores. These people didn't have chakra cores like the people back home. No, theirs was much weaker, thinner, and would be compared to a small genin. But that did not dissuade the fact that they still had them. Naruto sought to awaken Aragon's core. Normally chakra would be flowing through them already, unless one never used them at all, which was the case for the magicians he had encountered. Even Brahm had not awakened his, though he did allow Naruto to open it for him. But now, it seemed he had successfully opened the second gate. Aragon stood steady on his feet and glared at Naruto. Naruto just stared stoically back. Maybe I can get one more gate to open before I end this. Naruto then heard the yells around him. But, Naruto ducked under a swing and made several quick slashes at Aragon. Aragon parried quickly and tried to counter. Aragon's body might collapse because his chakra cores are too small. I don't even know how long they last either. Naruto looked at Aragon over again. He inwardly winced. Maybe he shouldn't have given him that many cuts. Well, time to finish this. Naruto blocked Aragon's strike. Adding chakra to his arms, Naruto pushed forward, sending Aragon flying back. Aragon tumbled on the ground but quickly recovered. Naruto didn't let him rest though. Naruto charged forward, bringing his sword downwards. Aragon was still in the process of getting up and wouldn't be able to block the strike in time. I'll stop it an inch before his head then, Naruto thought. But he never got the chance. As Naruto's strike sailed downwards, a new blade came and blocked it. Naruto blinked as he looked over to the side and saw raven black hair flowing. What the? Naruto blinked twice and turned his eyes back to wielder of the sword, though a rumbling feeling in his stomach was still present. Naruto saw the wielder of his new opponent and found it amusing. Stop, that's enough. Aragon looked at the person who had just saved him and looked at the newcomer. She had flowing black hair, her sword was thin but long. She had pointed ears. She was Arya the elf. Arya, what are you doing here? Aragon questioned, at the surreal savior before him. Arya turned to answer him, but Naruto intervened. Yes, what are you doing here? This is a sanctioned spar. I thought I asked no one to interfere. Naruto's voice was not harsh but simply calm, as if talking about the weather. Arya's eyebrows slanted in an angry V and her voice held hard steel to it. You are toying with him. There is no point to this continuing. At this Naruto laughed. He laughed very hard. He couldn't help himself. None of them knew what he was doing, though he would be surprised if they did. Naruto shook his head as he lowered his blade. Oh, how ignorance is bliss. Naruto said, sarcastically. Naruto looked away from Arya and turned to Aragon. Aragon, stand, we are done. Aragon blinked and did so. Naruto moved forward, or at least started to. A blade was held at his throat. Naruto raised an eyebrow at Arya. A flash of irritation flickered across his mind. What is it, elf? Arya still glared at him. You've done enough, leave. Naruto rolled his eyes. With a quick movement, Naruto did a quick palm strike towards Arya. What surprised Naruto is that Arya had seen it, or at least something coming. She jumped back and held her blade up. Naruto blinked and then shook his head. Naruto turned back to Aragon, who was still staring at him, his eyes a bit unfocused. Oh shit, the gate is closing. Naruto moved forward and then reached into his pouch on his belt. Finding what he needed, Naruto took the item and shoved it into Aragon's mouth. Aragon gagged as he felt something enter his mouth. Eat and swallow it, it'll make you feel better. Naruto quickly spoke. Aragon followed his directions and he immediately did feel better. Before he had suddenly felt all that energy leaving him, he felt like the world was going hazy and was close to fainting. Aragon coughed as energy went back into his limbs. Remember that feeling, Aragon? The dragon rider looked at Naruto quizzically. What do you mean? What? Aragon paused as he remembered what Naruto was talking about. It was that time where he felt a sudden rush and control. It was that time where he felt his body gain sudden strength. Naruto smiled as he saw the flicker of understanding in Aragon's eyes. Good. Now then. Naruto turned his eyes away and looked at all the hostile eyes at him, including Saphira's. Naruto sighed. This was the problem with being a foreigner. No one understood you. Looks like I may have to fight my way out of here. Naruto mused. Many of the people there blinked. Aragon openly wondered. What? Naruto turned to him and raised an eyebrow. Aragon spoke slowly. What was that you just said? Naruto blinked once and then realized his mistake. Oh, nothing, just a language. Naruto turned and started to walk away. What was the point of this? Naruto stopped. It was not Aragon who had said it. Naruto turned around and faced the speaker. It was Arya. Yes, elf. Arya still glared at him. What was the point of this? She repeated. Of what? Naruto said. I wonder how long till she snaps. Arya seemed to be losing patience as she gritted her teeth. You make him fight for 4 hours, you cut him up and kick him while on the ground. Then you ask him to get up again and again. Was there any reason to all this disgusting actions? Naruto scoffed at her words. Interesting, it seems none of you know what I was teaching him. There were murmurs and angry glares pointed at him. Naruto sighed as he scratched the back of his head, while sheathing his sword. Naruto looked at Aragon, who had sheathed his sword and was now trying to heal his own wounds with magic. Aragon breathed softly as he ran his hand over his scratches. As he did so, he heard a voice enter his mind. Little one. Aragon felt a tremor of worry from Saphira. It was reasonable, because as he was fighting he had somehow blocked her out. Yes, Saphira, I'm fine. Aragon said, trying to console her. Don't worry about Naruto, all. Aragon's eyes widened as he felt anger rush through like a stream. No, Aragon said determinedly over his connection. Saphira her head to one side. What? He publicly embarrassed you, tortured you. He hit you around like a sack of wheat. He deserves nothing. Aragon understood her protection and was grateful for it, but she did not understand that he taught me. Saphira was now confused. How did Naruto ever teach him? Aragon, sensing her confusion, tried to explain. I don't know how, but it felt like he was guiding my movements. Forcing me to learn. It was like I was on autopilot and Naruto was simply guiding my hand. All I needed to do was provide my determination. Saphira was silent at this. Naruto brought his hand to his chin thoughtfully as he watched Aragon. Well, let's see. How can I describe to? It's difficult for you to understand, so Naruto actually meant this in a non-mocking way. He knew that these people believed in honor, fighting a fair fight. He had believed that once upon a time. But now he just killed in the most efficient way possible, unless there was a special case, like him. Draw your sword. Arya growled. She pointed her blade at him. Naruto now turned back to her with eyebrows raised. Naruto blinked and shook his head, as he grasped his sword. My, did I get you angry? Arya's arm trembled as she gripped her sword tightly. Naruto looked at her stoically. This girl was probably better than Sakura at controlling her temper. Maybe all girls couldn't control their temper. That wasn't right because Naruto immediately squashed that thought and focused at the task at hand. He may have to drink himself to sleep tonight, though. Arya charged forward, not even waiting for Naruto to draw his. Aragon cried out to stop Arya. Arya slashed at Naruto's right side. Naruto used his left hand to draw his sword. Spinning on one side, Naruto used the flat of the blade to deflect the swing. Then, he stuck out his leg and Arya tripped over it. To Arya's credit, she jumped gracefully and landed on her feet. Arya turned back at Naruto, her eyes furious. Naruto rolled his eyes. Girl's temper, always the same. Arya dove at him, her blade singing in the air. Naruto's own blade met her blade, evenly. They exchanged blow for blow, neither getting any strikes in, or at least for Arya. Naruto added chakra to his arms once more and slashed at Arya. Arya blocked and was pushed back, having to backpedal back. Naruto looked at her and shook his head. You cannot defeat me. Aragon's eyes widened at the statement. He had just seen amazing sword play, but what made him pause at the statement was Braum's declaration. The weakest elf could beat the strongest human. How was Naruto matching her? Arya darted forward and slashed at his head. Naruto ducked, while sheathing his sword. He reached up and grabbed her arms, and then turning around Naruto threw her over him. Arya hit the ground, hard. Arya coughed as her back slammed to the ground, and a shadow loomed over her. Naruto shook his head while clicking his tongue. Pausing to take a look at all the men around and make sure he had their attention. You can all challenge me if you want, but Naruto raised his arm and brought it down. Everyone's eyes widened in fear and shock. Naruto punched the ground next to Arya. Crunch. The ground cracked with spider web marks as the force of Naruto's punch destroyed the solidity of the ground. Everyone took a step back. Naruto stood up and blew the dust off his fist. A smirk adorned his face as Naruto knew that everyone feared him now. As you can see, I've been holding back. Naruto looked down and saw Arya glaring up at him, still defiant. Naruto held out his hand and attached chakra strings to her. Naruto flicked his hand and she, magically, was placed on her feet. Arya blinked at what just happened. Naruto didn't make another comment and simply left. The blonde-haired nin let the breeze go through his hair as he laid his back against the firm tree. While the fighting was enough to warm him up, it wasn't a workout he wanted. The elf, surprisingly, was quicker than he expected but not fast enough to give him trouble. She matched the speed of Lee with his weights on. And Naruto had surpassed that speed many years ago, during the war. But overall, these guys sucked. He had seen better fights in the Zetsu clones and they were all monotonous, no pun intended. Naruto sighed as he shook his head. Maybe if they sucked like this, the army of the king sucked as well. Naruto placed his hand on his chin and sighed. This place needed change. He had seen the poverty and sadness that emanated from the people. The fear they had when they saw soldiers. Even the soldiers themselves feared their superior officers and so on and so forth. What they needed, or what the Varden needed to get the revolution moving, was a small strike force. Naruto closed his eyes. Who would he have on this strike team? Aragon was too important of a figurehead. He had seen how people adored him. Arya also was too important. He had seen her kind before, the royal kind. He didn't know what position she had, but for sure she was royalty. Maybe if he could get Gaara, Kakashi and... Wait, what was he doing? Naruto opened his eyes and sat straight up. What was he thinking? Why would he lead a small strike force? Why was he even thinking about helping these people? All he was here to do was kill a person and get out. That was it. Naruto let his head bang against the tree's trunk. But he couldn't help himself. He saw pain and he wanted to help. He saw a tyrant and he wanted to liberate. This was his nature. It was the nature that Naruto chalked on his own thoughts and immediately started going over his new jutsu to distract himself. He couldn't think about that. Not now, not ever. Naruto heard breathing over to the side and saw an interesting sight. If he couldn't help directly, he could always help indirectly. Aragon stared at the sky above him. He stared at it and stared at it. Saphira had gone to the dragon hold, after being frustrated with Aragon. She didn't understand what Naruto had done for Aragon. When Aragon had tried to convey the feeling, it felt like they were looking at separate places. Aragon felt a gap between them, a gap he never wanted to have. But it was there nonetheless. Aragon sighed as he closed his eyes and allowed the sun to bear down on him. He had also just finished talking to Arya. She was very kind to him, if a little bit annoying in her warnings to stay away from Naruto. Like Saphira, he had tried to explain to her what Naruto had done for him. But like Saphira, his words failed to express his feelings. But what had Naruto done for him? Even he didn't know for sure. It was like his body was suddenly alive. He could feel things he never thought he could. He was clumsy at times in his stride or work, but now he could control his body flawlessly. It was like he had opened something that made him connected to every single cell in his body. Not only had that, he felt a deep power within him. It was brewing over slowly, like a cup that was overfilled and slowly allowing water to brim over its side. Aragon didn't know where this energy came from, but it felt so mysterious. He could sometimes grasp it like magic, but at other times it would wash through his hands like water. It coursed mainly through his head, but sometimes, like water, it dribbled down to his neck. But for some reason the feeling would be blocked by something, like a stone wall or a dam. The flow would stop and pile up. And finally after a while it would recede back to his head. It was a strange feeling, and it occurred too many times for it to be just a normal twinge. Naruto definitely had done something to him. He did not know what, but something inside him awoke. But more than that, he had learned something. He could go farther than anything he thought possible. He was kicked over and over again, but for some reason he just got up. His body was tired then, and he sorely wanted to just let the darkness claim him, but Naruto's voice kept goading him. It was like Naruto wanted him to stand up again, only to be brought down so that Aragon would have to force himself to get back up. Aragon bit his lips as he thought of Naruto's words. Testing determination. He wanted me to keep getting up. Aragon sighed as he closed his eyes once more. Naruto beat the crap out of him and sliced him up, but for some reason, he trusted Naruto to watch his back. Aragon didn't know what attracted him to this man. It was like he exuded trust, or he seemed extremely sincere. Aragon shifted those thoughts away. When he talked with Arya, he had learned quite a couple things. One of them was his future. A jihad, and Arya wanted him to go to the elves to learn more of warfare. Did he have no say in his life? Could he not decide his own course? And what of the dwarf king? What did he want? But Aragon probably wouldn't find out till much later. Speaking of dwarves, Auric had gone to make a report to a jihad. It was probably a complaint about Naruto. Was he the only one that saw that Naruto had helped him? Aragon reached up his palm to wipe his face with his hand. Why is my life so complicated? Because you are destined for greatness. Or some crap like that. A new voice came about. Aragon jolted and opened his eyes quickly. He saw Naruto standing over him, smirking at him. Aragon blinked. I didn't even hear me approach. Aragon flushed at being so out of focus that he couldn't even hear someone come by. As if reading his thoughts, Naruto kicked Aragon. Don't worry, kid, not many people can hear me when I don't want them. Now what are you sleeping out here for? Aragon stood up as he brushed off his pants. Aragon shrugged and stood tall. I wanted some peace and quiet. Naruto shrugged as well. Fair enough. Sorry to disturb you, but I wanted to know, just in case, what did you feel? Aragon looked at Naruto quizzically. You mean when I fought you? Naruto rolled his eyes. No, the time we drank too much wine and slept with some women. Aragon blushed furiously and grumbled out, of course. Naruto chuckled and slapped Aragon on the back. Don't be too ruffled, kid. You're an important figure, you need to be calm and collected, or so I am told. Aragon nodded and sighed. I felt a rush in my head. It was like water or something like that. I don't know, but it felt like magic, but so intangible. That's chakra, Naruto explained. It's energy in all things. Like magic? Aragon asked. Naruto shrugged. Sort of. Let me explain. The sun had now fallen below the mountains and shadows reigned Trondheim. Naruto laughed as Aragon told of his brother at home and how they used to wrestle. Naruto shook his head as Aragon scratched his head in embarrassment. The duo was walking towards Trondheim, or at least the Dragon Hold. Along the way, Naruto had explained the differences between magic and chakra, as well as the feeling Aragon had. He had even went over most of the large mistakes he had seen in their fight. Also, Naruto wanted to bang the point into Aragon's head that the sword was an extension of the arm. Naruto had to admit, compared to the soldiers he had seen, Aragon had quite the reflexes. Naruto took a small drink from his canteen and allowed Aragon to drink some as well. So you're going up to the Dragon Hold, huh? Aragon nodded and then his face grew troubled. Aragon gripped the edge of his tunic. It seems that everyone hates you now. Naruto scoffed. Does it matter? They'll work with me if they have to, and I trust they won't stab me in the back. And it wouldn't matter if they tried. I could kill any one of them. Aragon nodded slowly, though he was unsure. The crowd seemed quite angry, including Saphira. Aragon allowed the breeze to go over him. He didn't have bruises, but his muscles were sore from their spar. Naruto closed his canteen as they reached the base of the Dragon Hold. So, are you going to call Saphira down or what? Aragon nodded. Yes, it would be impractical for me to climb up the stairs. Naruto shrugged. Naruto paused as he looked over and saw a crowd approach him. Company, and it's not for me either. Aragon looked over to where Naruto was looking at and blinked. Indeed, this crowd did not look like they were here for Naruto. No, their eyes were all on Aragon. Aragon gulped silently as he watched them approach. Naruto gave him a pat on the back, and then suddenly Aragon felt a pressure on his head. Don't worry, kid. Aragon's eyes widened as he heard the voice. But it wasn't like the normal thought speak he was used to. It felt like the water feeling he had. Aragon grasped at the water with his mind and thought, Naruto, how are you doing this? I'll explain later. First let's get this done, Naruto said, not even looking at Aragon. Aragon looked back at the crowd and saw an old lady approach. Aragon clenched his fist expectantly. The old lady was carrying something in her arms, but she kept looking at Aragon. Her eyes strengthened with determination. Silver hand, please. With that, the old lady opened the blanket in her hands to reveal a baby. Aragon blinked and looked at the baby and then back to the woman. The woman still looked at Aragon. Bless her, Silver hand. I am old and she is an orphan. She had no one left but me. Please bless her. Naruto raised an eyebrow at this. He had seen blessings before, but this was quite interesting to be the one giving the blessings. Well, that was not true, but he was helping the person who was giving the blessings. Aragon, Naruto said over the bastardized form of Inoichi's technique. Repeat after me. Atra gulai un ilian tothar ono un atra ono ways scoliro fra rother. As Aragon imbued the words, the lady bowed her head. Naruto watched as the lady thanked Aragon repeatedly, and Aragon only nodded and forced a smile on his face. Naruto smirked as he saw Aragon try to look at him for help but was too afraid of offending, or looking annoyed at the woman. After a minute or so, the woman left and Aragon turned to Naruto, while shaking his head, "Never again." Naruto barked out a laughter. Of course, the first time's the worst. But get used to the attention. People will swarm at you to either praise you or kill you. Aragon blinked and looked at Aragon. A rising fear bubbling from his stomach. What was he becoming? A person who gave blessings, a person who led an army into battle. Wasn't he a simple farmer? You never expect what you become. Naruto stated. Aragon blinked. Was he reading his mind? Aragon looked up at Naruto and sighed. I don't know. I don't know if I am ready for this. Naruto nodded. Which makes you ready for it? Because you will be willing to give it your all. And when you are faced with your path, do not fight it but rather embrace it and make the most of it. Naruto nodded to himself once more. Aragon blinked and then gave a wry smile. Did you think of that yourself? Are you sure you are not a hermit? Naruto blinked at the wording and gave a roaring laugh. He couldn't help it. Aragon looked at him strangely as if Naruto had lost his senses. Naruto saw the look and slowly calmed himself down. Sorry, Aragon. What you said was quite nostalgic and amusing to me. Naruto scratched the back of his head. I heard this proverb from one of my deceased teacher, and he was considered a hermit. Aragon blinked and then said, I'm sore. Naruto simply stopped Aragon by buffeting him in the head. As Aragon held his head, Naruto rolled his eyes. Don't worry about it, kid, I'm not that fragile. Just some things get to me. Naruto smirked at Aragon. Anyways, you better call your dragon before more babies show up. Aragon paled slightly and Naruto snickered at his expense. Aragon called out to Saphira. Saphira, are you there? Little one, finally it took you ages to come back. Did you walk to Narda and back and somehow got lost at Jerda? Aragon chuckled at her jibs and continued. No, come down. I need to get up. Oh, alright, and I was having a nice sleep too. Aragon could feel the playfulness over her voice. Aragon shook his head as he looked at Naruto, who was digging through his pouch. I know I put it. Aha, Naruto called out triumphantly. He pulled out a dagger, but it was a strange dagger. It had a ring at the end of the hilt like the other daggers Naruto had used against him. The blade also had two smaller prongs extruding from the connection between the hilt and the blade. And what made it extremely peculiar was the writing on the blade. Aragon couldn't read it and it didn't look anything like he had seen before. Naruto tapped the blade twice on his fingers before flipping it and handing it to Aragon. Aragon looked at it and grasped it. He stared at it for a moment before looking up at Naruto. What is this? Naruto smirked. A little something special. Think of it like a good luck charm. Aragon looked at the writing once again. Is it ceremonial? Naruto waved his hand and shook his head. No. Naruto placed a rough hand on Aragon's shoulder. I want you to keep this with you. Naruto's tone was solid and very serious. The two warriors locked eyes and Aragon came to an understanding of how important this dagger was. If you are in danger and you need help, throw the knife at the opponent. Trust me on this. It will help you. Aragon nodded slowly. All right, I promise. Naruto moved back, somehow satisfied with the promise. Good then. Off I trot then. Naruto moved happily towards the main buildings, whistling some kind of tune that Aragon couldn't match. The next day was a blur for Aragon. Very first thing in the morning, he was awoken by Auric. He was then taken down to be tested by Arya in magic. And while he did everything he could, It felt like he was so incompetent when she asked several things, numerous things that he had not even heard of. What happened to all his training with Brahm? If she knew more than he did, how could he ever fight Galbatorix? After he had finished testing his incompetence, Aragon had run towards the kitchen. He ate well and so did Saphira. There he was visited by Nasuda. She was a pretty girl whose skin amazed him. She held a royal air like Arya. She told him the directions to Murtaugh's cell. After she left, Aragon raced towards the cell and discussed with Murtaugh about Arya, Nasuda and more importantly Naruto. Finally, near the end of the day he traveled through the halls and found Solbum. The werecat was here and he followed the cat to a interesting sight. Are you going to stand there gawking like a mentally retarded baboon or come in like civilized man? Angela called at him as she was drinking her tea. But Angela wasn't looking at him but rather at what was in front of her. Yay, kid, hurry up, the tea is getting cold. And it's pretty good too. Naruto finished as he looked down at the board. Aragon moved forward carefully looking between the two extremely mysterious people. What are you doing here? Aragon called out. Naruto picked up a piece on the board and moved it carefully. Who? Aragon shrugged. Did it really matter who answered? Angela rolled her eyes. I heard you were a dragon rider from this. Angela motioned towards Naruto. Traveler. I knew you were special but not that special. Angela touched her lips thoughtfully. I suppose that's why Brahm took you under his wing. Aragon felt his stomach squelch as he heard Brahm's name. Well, you predicted his death, so, I guess. Calm down, kid. Naruto spoke quietly. Aragon jolted and looked at Naruto and then flushed with embarrassment. He was right, Aragon had lost his temper then. Angela, realizing her tongue was off, started to apologize. I'm sorry, Aragon, I didn't mean to be. Her voice trailed off, not knowing what to say. Aragon shrugged. It's all right. He chose to protect me. That is what matters. Naruto nodded as if agreeing with Aragon. Naruto bit his lip. This is like playing with Shikamaru. Shikamaru? Aragon asked. Naruto waved his hand. A friend from my homeland. Oh, Aragon said quietly, where exactly are you from? Naruto paused as he clasped his hands together and gave Aragon a sharp look. I come from a different land. West of here. Very, very far from here. Across the seas to be exact. Aragon's eyes widened. That was why he was so different. Dozens of questions appeared in his head and he was about to blurt one out when Naruto reached up and flicked Aragon in the head. Aragon stepped back and held his head and rubbed it slightly. Naruto rolled his eyes. Learn some restraint, kid. I won't tell you yet. You have to have some patience. Aragon lowered his hands and his shoulders in a bit of disappointment. But Aragon knew that Naruto didn't want to talk about it for now. Aragon bit his lips and asked. Could you at least tell me what your lands are called? Naruto looked at him with an annoyed expression and Angela sat back and laughed. Aragon reached and scratched his head as he waited for a response. Naruto shook his head. Geez, well, it's called the Elemental Continent. But my homeland is called Konoha, translated similar to leaf in your language. Aragon let the name go of his tongue. Konoha? Why is it called? Naruto flicked Aragon in the head again. Geez, what did I tell you about patience? Aragon had the dignity to look embarrassed. Naruto, instead of glaring, gave him a small amused smile. Come on, kid. Naruto turned back to the board and sighed. I lost, again for the third time in a row. Angela smiled and started to clean up the pieces. Looks like I got the hang of this game. Naruto rolled his eyes. And I only taught you this morning, damn it, freaking geniuses. Angela gave him a bland look and Naruto raised an eyebrow. What? Angela huffed. There is no such thing as being a genius, there is only being insightful or being dull as a brick. Naruto shrugged and with a sigh, he watched Aragon talk to Angela. He decided then, he would help Aragon with his little king problem. Naruto woke up, his body paralyzed once more. Naruto blinked slowly, allowing the tense and rigid muscles to relax slowly. But this did not stop the beating of his heart from palpitating rapidly. Nor did this stop the mind from plaguing his thoughts. Naruto finally loosened his body and turned over. He let his legs swing out and over the bed and sat up. He took a deep breath and looked around the room. He spotted a porcelain bottle next to his bed. So that was what caused the nightmare. Naruto chuckled hoarsely to himself. Naruto reached over and grabbed the bottle, swigging it. He let the sake burn his throat and fall deeply into his belly. He shouldn't be doing this because. But it didn't matter because he was herein. Naruto took another drink. He didn't want to have those thoughts right now. Naruto closed his eyes and allowed the cold liquor to fill his throat and burn it to hell. But now that he thought about it, he was going to hell anyways. Naruto looked around his room. It was bare with the necessitates. A desk for work, a chair to go with it. There was a wash bin on the side. The bed was nice and comfy. Sure, there were a couple cobwebs and patches of dusts around the area, but Naruto didn't mind. He had slept in worse places than this. Naruto got up and walked to the edge of the room where he had laid his clothes down. Naruto picked them up and dusted them off. He put the clothes slowly on, the fabric stretching over his bones and scars. Naruto idly wondered how many scars he had gotten during the war. Not including the ones he had gotten from. Naruto gritted his teeth as a flash of anger passed through his head. He really didn't want any of these fucking thoughts right now. Naruto put his clothes quickly and reached for the sword he had gotten from Frederick. Naruto paused as he looked at the sword. It wasn't his weapon of choice, no, his weapon was from the Wind Temple. At first he wanted to know how a sword worked. But since he had decided to help Aragon with the king, Naruto decided he would use the sword to train Aragon. Of course he was no expert, but he could give Aragon a tough time, well, in fighting at least. The boy had some good instincts though, adapted very quickly to the things he had shown him during the fight. Naruto sighed as he scratched his head. He had calmed down quite a bit. This was good, something was distracting him. It would help keep him from getting bored. It would help keep him from losing his sanity. Naruto grabbed the blade and strapped it to his back. The guard of the sword hit and bounced unceremoniously on his thighs as he walked outwards. Naruto walked through the hallways towards the lower levels. It was cold in the hallways, it was cold everywhere. Naruto walked towards the stairs so he could start climbing down. Naruto walked down the steps, his mind not really focused on his task at hand. Maybe I could start off with some speed work. Naruto thought to himself. He had seen what Arya, spelled it right this time folks, could do with her speed. It was faster, much faster than he had anticipated. Of course it was child's play to even keep up with it. Hell, he could have fought her with one hand and not move a single step. But what was frustrating was that Aragon was even slower than her. Weights. No, they wear samurai-like armor, it would just get in his way. Gravity seals. I would have to have it something like 1.3 times to not really kill him. He isn't a nin, so he can't use chakra to help his muscles. Maybe magic could. No, shouldn't make assumptions. I do not know the limitations of magic, so I shouldn't delve into it. Naruto bit his lip as he continued to glide down the steps. From there, we could always make a unique fighting style. He needed to start using his hands and feet more. The warriors around him were pathetic. By Naruto's standard, they were worth genin. Hell, they might as well be academy students. They relied solely on their swords and didn't bother to use their fists or hands as a tool. But probably that's because they aren't that strong. The stronger you were, the less you relied on weapons. And at a certain point, when you don't even need a weapon, you can bring out the weapon's full potential. Their strikes were weak, and speed was horrible. They had discipline, though, but only to a certain extent. It was frustrating to think that this was what they were using to fight a country that controlled most of the lands in this place. And how was Aragon supposed to overcome this? He could always take him away and teach him, but that wouldn't work. Naruto blinked as he remembered what Brahm had told him about the deal between the elves and Varden. The elves would train the rider. Naruto had also heard about the elves, Brahm had told him about them. Warriors of strength and power. They were like nobility but were extremely logical. What made this situation ludicrous but also curious was that the elves were not helping the Varden and dwarves. How was this supposed to work? Were the elves hanging back to see who win? That wasn't right. Brahm had told him that the elves were waiting for the dragon rider. So if Aragon was the rider, he had to go to the elves. This would work in two ways. One way was that Aragon would learn the rider ways, while persuading the elves to join the front. The second way was to find the person who had contacted him. It was magic for sure. The feeling when Brahm had first touched his mind all those years ago felt similar. Naruto had finally reached the bottom of the steps and walked towards the mess hall. As he walked through, he got stares or hostile glances. It seemed that many knew of his endeavors against their savior, and the elf. Naruto scoffed mentally. They knew nothing and they were nothing. Naruto paused and shook his head. He shouldn't like that. This was not how he thought. Everyone was worth something. A tinge of guilt passed through Naruto's stomach. Was he becoming this cynical? This destructive? Naruto took a deep breath and sighed. He would have to work on controlling these emotions. Maybe some meditation was in order. Naruto walked into the mess hall and went to the back. He grabbed a tray and helped himself to the food behind the dwarfs' backs. They couldn't sense him cause he moved in their blind sights. Useless usage of skill, but still it allowed him to avoid attention. Naruto ate his food silently in the corner, not wanting to attract attention. He watched the people carefully, taking note of their faces and what weapon they carried. It wasn't out of conscious thought but rather habit. Naruto sipped his bread into his soup and bit it, chewing slowly, allowing the thick soup to fill his taste buds. Naruto sighed. I wonder how my clone is doing. He had sent several clones throughout the Trondheim. They were to dispel every few intervals, even at night. Naruto had long gotten used to the mental fatigue, and the chakra from his dead tenant had long since helped him increase his capacity. Naruto took another bite and felt a tingle. Speak of the devil, Naruto thought as he felt memories of his clones pass through him. Naruto paused. This was his super clone's memories. Kage Bunshin was a very high-level technique but very fragile. One hit on a clone would make it disappear, something that made it very frustrating for Naruto. So what Naruto did was create a new clone, a supercharged clone which had enough chakra to handle about 30 hits, give or take a few jutsus. He had sent one of them down to check deep into the underground caves. What the hell, Urgles? Naruto thought. Quickly downing his food, the blonde traveler walked immediately toward Ajahad's office. He reviewed mentally what he had just learned. A large army will probably be here in about 2 days. From what I gathered from my clones in the library, it would be impractical to run from Trondheim. They would have to defend then. Naruto walked past several guard who recognized him. While they did tense up, they did nothing to stop him. It seemed that a jihad had told them to back off. Naruto didn't pay that train of thought much heed as he entered through the doorway and saw a jihad looking over several scrolls. A jihad looked up and sat back, crossing his arms. Naruto. What is it? The nin detected an aggravated tone in his voice. Naruto sighed. I'm guessing from your tone you disagree with what I did to Aragon. And Arya. Naruto blinked. What? I didn't even hurt her. A jihad leaned forward, his eyes glaring at him. His dark skin, which reminded Naruto of B, your actions may have lowered the morale. Naruto scoffed. Aragon can only grow stronger, that's all. A jihad opened his mouth to continue this argument, but Naruto cut him off as this was not the time for this conversation. Urgles are coming, in about 2 days' time. A jihad closed his mouth, and carefully sat back, staring at Naruto. A jihad regarded Naruto carefully, trying to discern if he was lying. Naruto did not do anything as he took the scrutiny with full force. A jihad sighed. How do you know? Naruto placed his hands together and poof. A jihad blinked as he saw another clone pop up next to Naruto. A jihad stood up, his hand automatically going to his sword. How? Naruto sighed as he waved his hands. I am not from your lands, remember? A jihad looked at the clone and back to Naruto and sat down. Alright, so you used that to detect the Urgles. Where are they coming from? The tunnels underneath here. A jihad nodded. I will call for immediate meeting of the leaders. We will prepare. Naruto shrugged. I will have to request something as well. A jihad raised an eyebrow. What is it? Naruto scratched his head. When the time comes, Naruto's eyes flickered upwards. I will tell you, but not now. Right now it is not important for your survival and will only muddle your thoughts. A jihad looked at Naruto and clasped his hands in front of him. Will this hamper the Varden? Naruto smirked, his fangs glinting in the candle light. Of course not. This is something personal. As soon as Aragon entered the room, he knew something was wrong. He had just finished his meal when a messenger had come, dragging Auric and him to this room. Auric and him had come to an understanding about Naruto during this time. Auric understood that Naruto was not torturing Aragon unjustly. Rather, Auric understood how Naruto was testing his determination. Saphira had only accepted Naruto's doings when Aragon sent the relevant memories. But both Auric and Saphira disagreed that Naruto had done it the right way. Aragon couldn't convince them, but for some reason he knew that Naruto's method was the only way. Aragon passed these thoughts off for another time as he looked between the leaders of the Varden, dwarves, and the elf. They all looked at the map on the table, which seemed like multiple pathways. What is going on? Aragon asked as he looked at the people around him. A jihad jaw clenched as he looked at Aragon and to everyone in the room. The Urgles are coming here in a day's time. We have received confirmation from a dwarf. He came running from the tunnels. A jihad pointed at black dot on the map. This is where he said he came from. Aragon blinked as the conversation went through his head. This was the tunnels. Aragon's eyes narrowed. Urgles were coming. The Empire. Aragon gripped his sword, which was attached to his belt. We will have them evacuate over here. A jihad finished explaining to his second in command. A jihad then pointed to 3 tunnels and circled them with his fingers. We will funnel them into these areas, so that we don't fight them all at once. Which means that we have to close off these tunnels. A jihad circled 4 tunnels. A jihad looked up to Aragon and Arya. This is your job. You'll be working with the dwarves to break them down. Aragon nodded slowly. A voice came from the shadows. Is there a fallout plan in case of being overrun? The warriors around the table turned towards the back, behind Aragon. They saw a mess of blonde hair, hunched over near the wall. Arya glared. You. Naruto looked up and smirked. Me. Naruto moved forward and looked at a jihad. So, is there a fallout plan? A jihad nodded slowly. In case we get overrun, the archers will provide a cover blanket so that the rest of us can retreat into the city. From there we will hold the main gate. A jihad pointed out again. Naruto nodded. Maybe I could use explosive tags. I'm pretty sure I can make some. Naruto paused as he heard Aragon's question. Why can't we break all the tunnels down? Auric explained. And Naruto cursed under his breath. Tags are out. That means, Naruto mentally sighed. It seems he would have to get up close and personal. Naruto scratched his head. Who is their commander? A jihad looked up, his face grave. A shade named Durza. Naruto blinked. Brahm had told him of shades. They were said to be immortal unless stabbed through the heart. Naruto thought this was funny as he had been stabbed everywhere including his head, and he still survived. Well, not everywhere. He had made sure no one had stabbed his reproductive organ. Naruto rolled his neck around, cracking the joints. So, how many do we have? In numbers, I mean. A jihad looked away from the dwarf king, Hrothgar, if Naruto remembered correctly. Around 10,000 strong. Naruto nodded. That was good, not too large so that the soldiers can hide behind each other and not small enough to be overrun easily. How do you plan to split it up? A jihad answered without missing a beat. 3,000 each entrance and 1,000 for reactionary force. Naruto tapped his lips. If he was going to get up and personal, he might as well go all the way. I'll take one of the entrances, split the army 4,500 each and still have 1,000 for reactionary. A jihad raised an eyebrow, and the room went silent. Aragon stared wide-eyed at Naruto. Why you're going to take an entrance by yourself? A jihad sighed, we cannot seal the entrance. I didn't say that. I said I would take one of the entrances, which means I will be fighting on my own. A jihad blinked and crossed his arms, thinking. Are you going to use what you showed me in my office? Naruto scoffed. If that was my only technique I would not be alive. Besides, that is one of my more basic techniques. At least to me, Naruto thought with bitter amusement. Do not worry. Nothing will get past me. I am more worried about you not having enough men to cover each entrance. The Dwarf King spoke up. Are you saying we are incompetent? Naruto eyed him carefully. I am saying it would be more effective to let someone like me ease your troubles. Aragon's eyes narrowed. What was Naruto thinking? Was he this mad? Had he lost his senses? No one can take on army by himself, let alone an army of Urgles. Even Aragon wasn't daft enough to know he couldn't fight an army. But he sounded so confident, as if he had done it before. Had he? A jihad shook his head. You sound overconfident. You may be a warrior, but no man can take on an army. Naruto scoffed once more and let out a small chuckle. I'm my country. I've seen one man take on countries, and I have burned villages, your equivalent to cities, to the ground, single-handedly. Rogathar spoke up. Any proof to your claim? Naruto raised an eyebrow and placed his hands together. A series of puffs arose and suddenly smoke appeared everywhere. Aragon blinked and waved his hands around to clear the smoke. Aragon looked around and his eyes went wide and his hand went to his weapon, as did all occupants to the room except for a jihad. The room was suddenly filled with plops of blonde hair. Aragon scanned his eyes around, his mind buzzing with questions. How? Was the only thing Aragon could say. The Naruto that still had his hands together chuckled at Aragon's shock, and at all of the occupants' shocks. Like I said, this is one of my basic techniques. I can create my own army if I wanted to. Naruto waved his hand once and another series of puffs ensued, along with some smoke, but it was less this time. The room had settled somewhat from the surprise. The occupants still stared warily at Naruto. The idea of a soldier wielding more power than the ruler, that was always troublesome. Naruto turned towards a jihad once more. Now, I can create about somewhere around 5,000 without hampering myself far too much, but I wouldn't even need that many. Rogathar took his hand off his hammer and looked at a jihad. He is strange. Where did you find him again? Naruto mentally smirked. Rogathar was trying to play this off. But Naruto, with his heightened senses, could smell the sweat on the back of these people's necks, and the tightening grips around weapons or fists. A jihad shook his head. I didn't. Brahm did. A jihad has shifted his weight towards his right foot. Unconsciously or not, it was positioned so that he could jump back, away from Naruto. Rogathar nodded as if it explained everything. All right then, human, you can. Naruto eyed the rest of the occupants. They were all shying away from him. Quite interesting really. But only one person actually didn't move away. It was the elf. She had simply stayed where she was and had her hand on her sword, probably ready to gut him if he showed any signs of attacking them. This fear was common though. Many feared what they could not understand, and fear often lead to stupid decisions. Naruto removed himself from these thoughts to correct the dwarf. Please don't call me a human. Naruto cut the old dwarf off. The Dwarf King raised an eyebrow. Then what are you then? Naruto smiled, his fangs appearing. He looked for more menacing now as his eyes narrowed. I am a demon. Aragon explained everything to Saphira and had finished closing down the tunnels. Aragon let out a sigh as he let the air hit his face, drying and cooling his sweat. His back rested against Saphira, her warmth still radiated into his body. Aragon wondered what would happen now. No, he knew what was going to happen. War. A battle was going to happen. After the meeting, before Naruto ran off somewhere, Naruto had told him very specifically to keep safe and be quick. Naruto said that all the fights he had been through were nothing compared to a full-scale battle. People will die around him, and it will seem helpless, but the more he killed, the less enemies there will be to kill your comrades. Simple logic, but it was something Aragon needed to remember. Something he needed to drive him to slash the heads of the Urgles and Cull quickly. But he couldn't help but shiver. The way Naruto had said it, it was like he had done this all his life. Could he? He said he was an assassin, but did that mean he fought in a war? If so, what was his country fighting over? And how did he get here? Aragon continued on these lines for a long time, while resting. Aragon sighed as he looked around. Saphira had finished garnering her armor from Hrothgar. Aragon was very thankful to the Dwarf King, and Auric was now in the process of sharpening his sword. Many of the soldiers were. They all held grim faces. Their eyes flickering towards the cave entrances and back to their weapons. Archers were strung their bows, checked the tips of their arrows. Many tightened armor constantly or even drank out of a wine skin. Aragon was also nervous, he felt the bubbles in his stomach rise. His hands weren't shaking, but his heart fluttered. Aragon blinked as he looked in the distance. He saw a familiar figure. Aragon stood up and walked over. Arya, what are you doing here? Aragon asked, confusion and worry dripping from his voice. Arya looked at him. Her eyes were hard, not in a bad way, but they held a certain steel. Arya sighed. It is my right to be here, I must repay my debt. Aragon blinked. Arya, fighting, but your wounds, they probably haven't healed yet. Arya shook her head, do not pamper me. I will fight. It is my place to be here. Aragon opened his mouth to continue arguing, in hopes of convincing Arya. A voice cracked in like a wedge hammered down. Now Aragon, if she wants to slice some people, let her do so. Aragon turned and saw Naruto approaching them, a joyful smile on his face. Naruto was not wearing any armor at all. Instead, he wore a green vest, and dark blue pants. He also had a white coat that had something akin to flames on it. It looked extremely fancy, not what you would wear to a battle. Naruto also carried a scroll in his hand, but Aragon paid that no mind. He didn't see any swords on Naruto. The only visible weapon was the copy of the dagger that Naruto had given to Aragon. But this dagger was on a necklace that was around Naruto's neck. Also on the necklace was a gem of some sort, but Aragon also paid that no heed. It contrasted so much with the other people surrounding them. Arya's glare turned dark as she looked at Naruto. Naruto ignored Arya for the time being. Aragon looked between the two and took an unconscious step back. Naruto smiled as he scratched the back of his head. Nervous kid. Aragon blinked and clenched his fists. He couldn't be nervous, he was a rider. He had to lead, set an example. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Well, he's trying to hold it in. What are you doing here? Human. Arya growled out. Naruto turned to her. His eyes now narrowed, the smile now gone and was replaced with a thin line. Naruto spoke slowly. I am a demon, nothing more, nothing less. Now elf. I am here to talk to Aragon. Arya gave one last glare and turned on her heel. She walked swiftly away. Aragon blinked and sighed. He was somewhat sad to see her go. But in hindsight, it was probably better because Arya might have attempted to kill Naruto. Aragon turned back to Naruto and waited expectantly. Naruto smirked at the kid. You are with this cave, correct? Naruto motioned with his head towards the cave on the furthermost right side. Aragon nodded. Yes. Aragon paused. A question built in his mind. But are you really going to take on the army by yourself? Aragon tried to calm his voice, but he still had an exasperated tone. Naruto scoffed. Kid, I just said I would. Aragon countered. With only a dagger. Naruto sighed and shook his head. No, not just a dagger, I will fight with my weapon of choice. Now, let me tell you something. Naruto raised a hand and pointed at Aragon's forehead. Like I said before, be quick, kill lots and you'll do fine. But if things get too dicey, back out immediately. Don't be stupid. With that, Naruto turned and left before Aragon could continue this conversation. Naruto didn't get that far though, a jihad stopped him. Naruto. Naruto turned and saw a jihad. Ah, there you are, I was going to ask which cave you had assigned me. A jihad pointed towards the middle cave. That one. I have set up a fallout force of 2,000 to back you up if you fall. Won't be necessary. I know my abilities. They won't get past me. A jihad paused and gave a hard look at Naruto. Naruto now smiled and held the gaze. I wonder though, Naruto thought. Should I give him a dagger? A jihad continued. You will explain everything to me afterward. Naruto shrugged. Why not? Naruto spotted something interesting that was moving towards Aragon. A jihad stalked off to lead his army on his battlefront. Naruto moved towards the thing that caught his interest. Murgith was it. The son of Morzan turned towards Naruto in surprise. Naruto. Naruto smiled. Well then, I see a jihad released you. Murgith nodded slowly. He had heard from Aragon what Naruto had done, and Murgith knew to be wary of him. And you defeated an elf. Naruto shrugged. It was simple. But on the other hand, Naruto tossed Murgith a Hirishin dagger. Murgith caught and turned over his hand so he could see it glinting in his palm. Naruto scratched his head. That's for you, throw it if you're ever in trouble. Murgith nodded towards Naruto. Thanks. Though Naruto accepted the gratitude, he could feel the uneasiness, know the doubt in Murgith's voice. Either way, Naruto smirked. Welcome kid. Sigh. He doesn't believe me, oh well. It didn't matter for Naruto. Well sort of, he hated seeing good kids die. Naruto sighed as he walked to his tunnel. As he walked, many looked at him strangely, some even glared at him. But he could feel it, that familiar feeling of fear. It was surprising to an extent. He felt it as a kid and didn't understand it. But he felt it in this place and understood it. Ironic really, because he was now accepted in his home country. Hell, they even tried to make him head of the Supreme Council. Naruto declined of course as he had found something better. And now, Naruto closed his eyes and he let his hand drift towards his scroll. He grasped the scroll and pulled it out. He now stood in front of the cave. His breath was showing in the cool midnight air. He would start early, no need to wait. The more he killed, the more warmed up he'll be in case someone big came. He didn't have to worry about chakra, he had an unlimited amount, or at least close to it. It was actually the reason why he was able to fight Madara for about a week straight. And Madara finally died of chakra exhaustion since Naruto's seals prevented him from escaping. Oh, the wonders of Hirishin. Unlike his father, Hirishin was not his main focus. Naruto unraveled the scroll, a complex seal laid within the writing portion. Naruto laid it on the ground and smiled as he looked at the inscription. It was used to contain his weapon. The weapon he had received after training in the Wind Temple. Naruto placed his hand on the weapon and allowed chakra to flow into the scroll. A small poof was heard and Naruto looked through the smoke. Ah, there it was, his old friends. Naruto grasped the bars of the wind hollow tonfa and spun the once to get the feeling back. The tonfa were really simple, as the wind monks were more for practicality than aesthetics. It was silver all around and the tonfa base was actually hollow in between. Naruto was skeptical, calling it a pipe with a handle, but his instructor had beat his with one swing. When Naruto had finally surpassed his instructor, he received the wind hollow tonfas. Naruto spun the tonfa and hooked then on the back of his belt. He had removed the sword sheath, and replaced it with what it was intended for, the tonfa sheath. Naruto closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, as he was taught by the wind monks, may the wind glide your soul to peace. May my blade be quick so that you feel no pain. After he went to the wind monks, he said this for every opponent he met. Even Madara had heard the same mantra. But Naruto would not say this for one person. That person would die very slowly. Naruto reached into his gut and felt the chakra he had stored away for so long. Naruto cracked the barrier, grasped the nostalgic liquid and opened his eyes. Aragon watched as Naruto put on the strange weapons. It looked like a metal stick with a handle. Naruto had closed his eyes and whispered something. And then when Naruto opened his eyes, a huge wave of energy erupted. Aragon leaned back and shaded his eyes. A bright light engulfed the Varden as Naruto was now glowing. As quickly as the blue and white light had come, it went away. Aragon blinked out the stars in his vision and looked at Naruto, who drew his tonfa. Naruto smirked and looked at the tunnel. Okay. Naruto yelled. Everyone in the Varden had stopped to watch. Naruto cracked his neck and crouched slightly. Let's go. Naruto took a step forward and suddenly disappeared. A huge echo that sounded like a pop erupted. And the ground where Naruto had stood cracked, following a huge gust of wind. Aragon felt his gut flip. He had fought someone with that speed. And it was only a couple seconds later did he say that Naruto was crazy. Auric agreed with him. It didn't take long for Naruto to find the Urgles, from their big smelly skin and their hulking masses. Naruto's senses easily picked them up. The Urgles were actually surprised in seeing someone charge at them. The lead one who had some kind of jewelry on his horns, laughed at him and took out his axe. Naruto relaxed his grip on his tonfa and allowed his body to move for him. The lead Urgle slashed as Naruto approached. It was then that Naruto allowed chakra to push into his feet, making him move at speeds beyond any normal human. The Ugrals froze. Any nervous system has a limit before it freezes trying to process what happened. When the nervous system is hit with a certain amount shock, that is unrelatable to previous encounters, the nervous system freezes. This is why many people, who are stabbed from behind, freeze up. With these new feelings, the nervous system tries to understand what happens. The Urgles' nervous system was no different. Naruto had moved at such blinding speeds that the receptors in the Urgles' eyes, who could not boost their reception capacity with chakra, froze up. Well, this was one of the reasons why they froze up. The other reason was that their bodies now had countless cuts on them. The air under the tunnel and laid still. Even if there was no direct wind, the movement of thousands of troops certainly caused a draft. But the air was still right now. Many of the Urgles behind looked ahead and saw that the front had suddenly stopped. One of the Urgles roared, in hopes of getting the Urgles in front to move. As the Urgle finished yelling though, a disturbing scene appeared. All the Urgles in the front lines fell down, their bodies spill blood on the floor. The Urgles took an unconscious step back. They didn't know what happened, they were too far behind from the scouting party that moved on ahead. There wasn't anyone near the dead bodies of their kin. But then the heard it. Sigh. The Urgles looked up and saw a small human drop to the floor. The Urgles brandished their weapons and roared. Naruto looked at them, his eyes sharp but bored. You know, I didn't really have high expectations for this fight. Naruto took a stance, shifting his right leg to the back. He turned his front foot so that it was pointing towards the rightmost Urgle. He used his left tonfa to point at the Urgle in the center. And finally he spun his right tonfa, getting ready to use the wind chakra. Naruto leaned forward, preparing to spring. This won't even give me a workout. Naruto roared and dashed forward. Aragon looked at the battle below. He had barely been saved by Angela and berated himself for being foolish as Saphira flew above. Aragon looked at the scene below. It wasn't pretty. Since the time Naruto went in, till now, not a single Urgle had gone through the tunnel. Whatever Naruto was doing, it was damn effective. On the other hand, the two tunnels left were pouring out Urgles. Ajihad and Hrothgar were using their soldiers to great effect. And because the center tunnel was being held by Naruto, the Varden could use it as a flanking point. But even so, the Varden and dwarves would not last long if this fight continued. While they were doing well, the Urgle numbers seemed endless. Murghith was with Ajihad fighting side by side. Both were on horseback. Arya was fighting near Hrothgar. She had no horse but moved faster than any man and Ergel. Aragon looked over the battlefield to see which would need the most aid until he felt a consciousness enter his mind. There are loud noises under Trondheim. It sounds like Ergels are trying to dig into the city. Aragon flew Saphira down towards Arya. Get on, Aragon shouted. Arya jumped up and landed on Saphira's back gracefully. Saphira snapped at an approaching Ergel towards the right. But sadly, her left flank was open. A Kull got through and smashed his battle axe into Saphira's side. Saphira roared in pain. Arya reacted quickly. She raised her hand and quickly enchanted a spell. A green orb left her hand and blasted the Ergel away. Saphira pulled away from the battlefield with powerful wing strokes but a rasping breath. Are you okay? Aragon asked, concern, worry and every other emotion billowing in his stomach. My side hurts. The armor is squeezing my lungs. Saphira groaned. Aragon told Arya of Saphira's conditions and Saphira go up to the dragon hold. Stepping forward, the blonde-haired Nin lowered his head, allowing a sword to pass over his head. Naruto took a step forward with his right, using the momentum to swing his tonfa. His metal tonfa hit the Aragel's face dead on. Instead of slicing as it normally would have done, the tonfa crushed the head. Naruto had stopped slicing and dicing because he had been spilling too much blood, literally. Naruto spun around the falling body of the Ergel so that he was crouched. He thrust his tonfa upwards so that he edge smashed into a Ergel's jawline. Naruto sent wind chakra through the pipe. The pipe pushed the air through the pipe, concentrating it as it went. When the wind chakra hit the Ergel, it blew its head off clean. Naruto weaved through another axe, sword and then lashed out with both his tonfa. This time he used an air wave. The tonfa directed the waves, crushing the Ergels into the tunnel walls. Their bones were either crushed or their bodies impaled by other fallen weapons. Naruto stepped back as the blood started squirting everywhere, again. Naruto cracked his neck as he looked at the damage he had done. Naruto took in a deep breath and sighed. Damn it, I have to wash my clothes again. Naruto looked over himself with disgust and annoyance. He had gone a bit crazy with the hacking and crushing. He had cut through the army easily. It was more like practice than a workout. They moved slow, couldn't keep up with him, and the list goes on and on why these foes were child's play. Naruto wiped the blood from his face with his sleeve. He had cut an Ergel in half and paused too long, allowing some of the blood to splash onto his cheek. But that was 20 minutes ago and he had killed over 5,000. He mainly used lancing wind techniques. Because the opposing army had no way to counter chakra-based techniques, Naruto was lazy and used mass area techniques. It was sloppy, but got the job done. And when Naruto was really bored, he would go hand to hand. And he got bored about an hour ago. Naruto cracked his neck and looked at the slow approaching force. Great, more of them, narrator thought. Naruto wondered where the leader was. It was obvious that the Shade Durza was the leader. He had heard from a jihad about that. But where was he? He was probably about a mile and a half from Trondheim. Naruto put away his tonfa in the sheath. I'll go hand to hand, I need to review that. Naruto thought with some amusement. That was when he felt it. He felt the tug on his neck towards the right side. That meant only one thing, a Hirishin kunai had been thrown. Naruto immediately sent chakra through his dagger in his left hand. Naruto disappeared in a flash of yellow. Aragon glared at the person only a few paces in front of him. And all the Ergels surrounding him. Durza stood tall glaring at him. This was it, he was going to die. He had warned Saphira. But it was too late for her to come help him. He would go down fighting. There was no way to get help. Aragon jolted as he remembered the dagger. Aragon reached slowly into his armor, not taking his eyes for Durza. Durza charged at him, intending to slice him in half. Aragon grasped the dagger and threw it at Durza. It was a really clumsy throw. Aragon had hoped to use it as a distraction to catch Durza off guard. Durza didn't mind as he raised his sword to deflect it. Suddenly, Flash of yellow appeared and roar erupted, Rasengan. Aragon stared as he watched Naruto suddenly appear with a blue spinning orb in his hand. The orb was beautiful as it rammed itself into Durza's sword, destroying it completely. Naruto yelled to Aragon, "Let's go, kid."